Hello and welcome to Your Coaching Journey, a podcast for doctors about coaching. Whether you're a coaching doctor, a doctor who is learning to coach, or a doctor who'd like to build coaching into your professional life, then this is the podcast for you. Hello, I'm Tom Dillon, and with me today is my co-host and business partner, Helen. How are you today, Helen?
I'm very well, thank you.
See how I noticed I didn't say your surname this time, just in case I was going to trip over it. I was feeling very confident, but it's done. How are you today?
I am very well, thank you. How are you?
Good. I'm wonderfully well. Thank you very much.
Good. Today we're going to talk a little bit about tools.
Tools.
Coaching tools.
There's a song.
We might just do a podcast with you
Tools
singing.
was a baby rabbit. Do you know the song? John Denver song.
No, I don't.
But we're not talking about Tools the baby rabbit.
No, we are not. No. I wanted to...
It's a very short song. I could sing it.
No. I wanted to have a chat with you today because we regularly talk about tools on the podcast. We've talked about a number of them so far.
It's a regular slot on our podcast.
It is. Sometimes we get asked, because we have a very non-directive approach to our coaching on our diploma, sometimes we get asked by trainees how we can introduce a tool or a concept or an exercise without being directive. Like, isn't that directive? So the first thing is how a tool is not directive. And the second part is how do we introduce them in a way that maintains that non-directive approach to coaching?
Yeah, and I think it's interesting to pull back a little bit and think about what non-directive in the coaching room means. And obviously the phrase originated with Carl Rogers and the person-centered approach. So his original approach to therapy was non-directive because he didn't want to do the psychoanalytical stuff that Freud and Jung had been doing. So he called his approach non-directive, but then quickly thought, actually, this is a bit negative. Sounds like I'm trying not to do something and I want to be doing something positive. So that became the person-centered approach rather than the non-directive approach. But I think because we are all quite directive in the way we go about having conversations with other people when they have a predicament, we tend to jump into rescuer mode or solution-focused mode and want to come up with and
advice giving.
If we're in a coffee shop with someone and they're saying, oh, I've got this real problem, I don't know what to do. We go, well, you know what you need to do? You need to do this. We're all very used to that, aren't we?
Yes.
Everyone I come across is very, and I do it. You know, if I'm just in a coffee shop with someone, sometimes I do. Actually, I've got a friend at the moment. I take a very coaching approach with him. He's become a little project. so I am very coachy in my conversations, but I think historically and still to some extent when I forget myself, I will just say, you know what you need to do.
Here's the solution.
Have you tried this?
Yeah.
So I think for explaining coaching, and as we do on a coaching training program, we have to move away from that. So that's our starting point of being directive. So the non-directive is not giving advice. And that's what we're really talking about, isn't it, in the coaching room?
And our doctors are really used to giving advice.
Doctors are very used to giving advice.
And as a doctor, personally, if I go to a doctor, I want them to give me some advice in most cases. So that's good. But
I don't think any medical professionals, we've said before on previous podcasts that we're involved in lifestyle medicine. Now, I don't think you would coach in a lifestyle medicine environment without providing some information and thinking about what is good for someone's health. You'd want that thinking to be going on, wouldn't you?
Yes.
So there might well be some introduction of what we know to be true about health and what is good practice. So it exists within that world. So I think what we're trying to introduce people to and get them to embed in the way they talk to people is it is a non-directive way of being. So we're holding that space for someone whilst they generate their own thinking and come up with their own answers to life's problems. So that's our starting point.
Yes.
What does it mean to be non-directive? So if we think about the content of the conversation, we're not being directive about what they're going to do, what action they're going to take,
Yeah.
how they should think about it. We're going to have to be directive about the coaching process.
Yes.
So I don't think, in terms of sharing tools, that there's any problem with that, because I think we have, as the coach, we have to be directive.
We have to manage that conversation,
Yeah.
move them forward in their thinking.
Yeah, so I was coaching someone recently, and it was about a relationship issue in the workplace, and it led on quite naturally. The guy was having a conversation was coming up with his boss, and he said, "Can I just talk through how this is going to work and see what you think?" So we talked it through. I'm never going to tell him what I think, because it's not for me to say, is it? I said, I'll tell you what, rather than me telling you what I think, let's hear from your boss. Come and sit over here. You sit in the boss's chair. Now you're the boss. What do you think to what this gentleman's had to say? And so he sat there and spoke as his boss. Now, that's a tool. It's the empty chair exercise. I didn't kind of build it up. I didn't go, oh, here's a tool. I just invited him to. Within the same conversation, I asked him whether he was familiar with transactional analysis and the parent-adult-child model, which he wasn't. I said, well, it's a model that looks at relationships. And I pulled it up on my laptop. I've got a PDF with that model on it, and talked him through the various elements. I said, it's a model that helps frame relationships, perhaps look at it from a different perspective. Talked it through with him, and he said, oh, no, that makes perfect sense now. And I wasn't telling him what he should think about the relationship. I wasn't telling him that he was being a child, or, it was just presented the model. And he said, no, I get that. And actually what I want to be doing is having those adult-to-adult conversations with my boss. Yeah. I didn't have to say that.
So they're in that coaching session with two ways, perfect examples really, of how we can integrate tools and exercises and information sharing into coaching without it being, I've got a solution for you, or I'm going to give you advice. Yeah. So there's that way that the tools inform your coaching, in that that there's this exercise called the empty chair exercise. So you invite them to enter that exercise without really being explicit, or you ask questions that are informed by that exercise. And then you've got the other side of it where you might share a model or some information, or perhaps, when we look at positive psychology, some research, and then what are your thoughts once we've shared that?
Yes, and that was an hour and a half coaching conversation that I guess the empty chair exercise probably took 5 minutes, because we did it a few ways. He became himself again, and then his boss again. So there was a few different interactions going on, but it took 5 minutes. The parent-adult-child model probably took 5 minutes, but it helped him to make sense of his world, see things from different perspectives. And I think that is part and parcel of coaching, is to facilitate that perspective taking on the part of the coachee. So if we can do that by introducing a tool, then I think that's perfectly valid way to be.
And non-directive still.
And non-directive, because we're not telling them what they should think or what action they should take.
So that really answers the question of how we integrate tools.
Yeah.
And
on our
ideas.
next podcast, we will be looking at... No, carry on. Sorry.
Well, I was just going to say, I think that answers the question of how we introduce tools and exercises and information into our coaching without it being directive. And I think that it's, like you say, very similar in the world of health coaching and lifestyle medicine, exactly the same as in positive psychology. Here's something that is really useful and something that perhaps the person might want to be aware of or need to be aware of if it's a health issue or lifestyle medicine approach. And then we invite that coaching around that topic rather than saying, well, you really should be moving more.
I think we have to be careful. I think there's a danger that in introducing any model or any tool that we could end up being directive. So within that sharing of the parent-adult-child model, I go, well, clearly she's being the parent, you're being the child. That's never going to work, is it? You need to be adult to adult. That's what you need to do. That could be, if you're not thinking about it too closely, you could end up doing that. And I think the same with introducing perhaps health tools, that it could be implied because you're introducing the tool that you think people should act in a certain way. So I think there's a danger that we have to be aware of and try to stay clear of. On the kind of flip side of that, of just within a conversation, so that's an hour and a half conversation, and out of that hour and a half, I've taken 10 minutes to introduce 2 different tools. What I will also do is offer people the invitation to do certain things before they come to my coaching. Mm-hmm. So they're exercises that I ask them to do just to get them thinking about the coaching. They're not directive in terms of, again, think about what they should be thinking or doing, but they're invitations to think about thinking and bring those along to the session. We might not use them. We might just end up in a conversation. So I'm coaching someone at the moment. We've now had 2 sessions, hour and a half sessions. She did a couple of bits of pre-work. And we've not touched on them. I haven't got near them because actually she came in the first session and there was a good conversation going about how she wanted to be. Second conversation, again, something completely different, but a good conversation about her life and where she wanted it to go. I'm not going to say, no, hang on a minute, I've got a tool. I wanted to do the tool this week. And yes. I think that's the danger that I know some people have a program and they might say, well, in the first session, we'll explore your values. I think there's something too rigid about that.
Yeah,
I think we have to go with the coachee and what they are, how they're coming into the room. We're coaching the person, aren't we?
Absolutely. And in much the same way, I tend not to do something before my first session, but I will sometimes set sort of some homework, if you like, some invitations to play between sessions with ideas, with tools. It might be drawing something, it might be reflecting, it might be going on a little mini adventure, depends. But again, it's an invitation, it's not essential. And I still have clients now who will say to me, you know, if we've ever bumped into each other or spoken since our coaching has finished, they'll say, I never did do that journaling thing you told me about. And that's absolutely fine, because that clearly wasn't for them at that time. Yeah. It was simply an invitation to explore something. So,
and I guess that's an interesting notion, isn't it? And we've talked about journaling before on a different podcast, which we'll put the link in the show notes. But is saying, well, journaling, we know that journaling can help to clarify thinking, and maybe that's something that you could do between this session and the next session. That's kind of directive.
Yes, but again, you're not telling people what they should be doing.
Well, you're saying you should be journaling.
But if you look at the outcome they want from your time together, their intentions for your coaching, you're not saying, well, that's easy, I can fix it, all you need to do is this. You're saying journaling is a tool which might invite more thinking in between sessions, the writing down of that thinking that happens anyway between sessions.
Yeah, and certainly the lady that I've just talked about, she's got some thinking to do. And one of the things she's going to do is capture that in journaling.
Was that a suggestion that you made?
It was, yeah. Yeah. I'd like to say that she came up with that, but no, that was definitely how she was going to capture her thoughts.
And I think this is an interesting part of coaching, isn't it? Because we're both very much of the opinion that we don't give advice. That is definitely a no-no as far as we're concerned. I love the idea that we all have the resources within us to solve our own problems. But I prefer to think that as human beings, we're all doing the best with the resources we have available to us, and there are also always more resources available. So if there is something that someone is completely unaware of that would be useful for them in order to help them think more, introducing it in a way where there's no pressure, try it, be curious, it might change their lives. And who am I to hold that back from that person? So I think that's an interesting decision and distinction that perhaps you have to make independently as a coach about what type of coach you want to be.
Yeah. And I think there is something about the journaling thing, the invitation to journal is still directing the process rather than directing their thinking or their actions. I mean, obviously there's an action in writing a journal, but I think what she was doing was carrying on the thinking beyond the coaching room, which is part and parcel of our coaching. We don't believe that the thinking just happens in the coaching room. And I want people to carry on with their thinking. I know they will anyway, but and I'm actively encouraging them to keep thinking. And journaling is just a way of capturing that thinking.
Yes.
I'm slightly hesitant to say it's non-directive because I think there is a degree to which we're directing the activity. But in the same way that I'm offering an invitation for them to do some pre-coaching work, here's a exercise you might want to do before we start. So I think, yeah.
And I think that's really important because I never would say to a client in their next session, what did you write about in your journal? With an expectation, one, that they'd done it, and two, that it was appropriate for them to share. So if they'd never journaled, not a problem. But how is your thinking since we last spoke could be informed by that journaling, or maybe they haven't done it at all. So I think it's not essential to the coaching process that the journaling is done, and in that way it's not directive. But if you want to be really pedantic, the fact that I'm going to ask you questions and expect an answer might be seen as directive.
And you are the coach. You are directing the conversation, aren't you? You're managing the conversation.
Yes.
And if someone is sitting in front of you and they're going off at a tangent and talking about, and they end up just gossiping, which happens sometimes, then we might want to bring them back on track. Because if it's not relevant to what we're talking about, it's just gossip. We're just having a chat, aren't we? It's not a conversation with a purpose anymore. We're going to bring them back on track. So we're definitely, as a coach, being directive of the process. Yeah. And I think there are going to be times. So in the past, I don't do so much now, but in the past, I've done 360 feedback coaching, where I've held that space for someone whilst they've received feedback from their peers, or bosses, direct reports. And so it's not a conversation because basically they're reading a report or, we're going through it together. They're having perhaps some tough messages delivered to them. So I don't think whilst it is coaching, I'm not coaching them really. The coaching almost comes after the 360 feedback. Yes. So there's a tool that gets introduced within a coaching framework that I don't think it's a coaching conversation. I think the coaching conversation comes after the receiving of the information. Yeah. But you wouldn't send someone a 360 report and say, read this, then we'll have some coaching, because it's not safe to do so. I've had someone in a 360 feedback session who said, right, I want my boss down here. I want him down here now. I'm going to have this out with him right now. And I had to manage that situation and talk him down from that. And it was fine. I think he still did have a conversation with his boss, but it was on the back of having the time and space to talk it through with someone first.
Yeah. So it's almost like we want to use this tool and then we're going to use coaching to work with the tool, as opposed to our way of doing things, which is we've got some coaching and sometimes the tools are going to come in, but we still want to coach around the tools. We want to share them as a useful addition that's going to move our thinking forward, or move our clients' thinking forward.
Yeah, so I use a strengths profile that I send to people beforehand. They fill out a questionnaire. They tend to send me the profile before they come to coaching. I'll take a look at it. It means nothing to me because I don't know what they're making of it. But it's quite informative for me to see what fits into that for them. But if I was having a coaching conversation around it, we might pull it up on the screen if we're online. But I will be asking them questions about it, about what they made of it, what insights they had, what they found surprising, what they're disappointed in. There is a great opportunity there for them to increase their self-awareness.
It's the same as the wheel of life, isn't it?
Yes. I guess the wheel of life is more about them thinking about it first, unless you're giving them the parameters, unless you're giving them the labels. But if you're asking them to think about what elements they want to put into their wheel of life. I quite often do a wheel of leadership. So I ask them, what's important to you as a leader? And that we'll populate the wheel of life with leadership qualities, and then we'll kind of assess where they are now, or they'll tell me where they are now and where they want to be, and we'll work on that in the future. So there's a tool that might come up at the start of a coaching conversation where you say, okay, you were here last time, where do you think you are now? And where do you still want to get to?
So we're still asking those questions around that tool.
Yeah.
And I think that's the key, isn't it? Still using coaching questions, still keeping it open, still eliciting new thinking and that movement forward.
And it's still about us not being the expert and not knowing what's best.
Yes.
And not advising them of what they should be doing. We're facilitating the process, being directive about the process.
Yeah, and that's key. That's the key. Differentiation.
Yeah. So in summary, I think it's fine to be directive about the process. I'm never going to be directive in terms of what people should be doing with their lives. I think that's for them to decide, but I will happily give them some activities to do that might help clarify their thinking.
Yeah, and introduce some of those tools that are going to open up the conversation in the coaching room as well.
And as we've said, within a lifestyle medicine context, if you are coaching in that health coaching sphere, there is going to be information sharing about, you know, what nutrition good practice is, what exercise good practice is. Again, not to define it for them in terms of what they need to be doing, but then to explore with them what's going to work for them.
Yeah.
Good. Excellent.
Well, hopefully that's answered some people's questions around tools and how to use them in a very loose sense. And we'll look at another tool in a few sessions' time, a few episodes' time.
Yeah. I think it is useful to introduce coaches out there that perhaps haven't come across some of these things, some tools and how we might use them. But this was just maybe that hesitation that people have, or you've taught us to be non-directive. That tends to be the approach of most coaching training, to be non-directive. And now you're telling us to get them to fill some forms in. But I think that clarification of being directive about the process is what we're talking about here.
Definitely.
Lovely.
Brilliant.
Thank you, Helen. Enjoyed that.
Next time on the podcast, we're going to talk about a topic that can come up in the coaching room.
I think a topic that within the medical world quite often comes up in the coaching room.
Absolutely.
And that is the topic of burnout.
A big topic.
A big topic.
I don't think we're going to cover it all, are we?
Not in one podcast, no. We'll break it down. We'll
make a start.
We'll do a bit of an overview, because I think there's a lot of... it's quite elusive, burnout, I think. It means lots of different things to lots of different people.
Excellent. Well, I shall look forward to that.
Thank you, Helen.
See you next time.
See you next time. Bye-bye.
This has been a Monkey Pants Productions podcast.